Hello, welcome to this Experian webinar. This webinar will cover Experian Payments Gateway, EPG, and the processing via hardware security module. Once logged into EPG, you'll come into this summary screen and we can see that there's no tasks currently outstanding for me as a user, although I am actually in as sysadmin, so I would see everything at this point. What we're going to actually do today is to just have a quick look at the configuration, and what I've got is a application set up here which I've called directory monitoring. And really for what we're doing today, this information here doesn't really concern us, but what we do want to do for that particular application is we want to look at the workflows we've got set up, and it's this particular workflow that I'm interested in. It's going to import a file and validate it. It's then going to push it out for manual authorization, and then it's going to use the credentials sat on the HSM to sign and transmit the file. So we're going to automate the sign. Right. And in terms of starting that workflow off, we're going to use a directory monitoring. So again, under the application, I've got several directory monitorings running, but this is the one that we're interested in. It's going to point into a particular directory, looking for a file of this file name. You can use wildcard characters to pick up files within here. It's going to import the file using this file format, and once imported, it's going to move the file out into another location. If you don't want to leave that file hanging around on your system, you can just select to delete it. And we're going to run this particular workflow. Just to look at the security that we've got set up here. Within EPG, we've set up a particular instance that points to the physical HSM. So this is where we tell it the device type, it picks up the slot of the actual device, and this is where we actually tell EPG how to log on to the HSM. So this is a username and a specific PIN number to allow EPG to log on to the HSM and gain access to the appropriate credential. In terms of the credential that we're going to use, if we come into the security tab, I'll look at the system defaults. This is where we set the default for the entire system. So we could set the default as the HSM credential, or we could indeed set the default as a smart card credential, but then at a lower level point various service user numbers or workflows at a particular HSM. So for this particular one, we've got the default as the smart card. So if we come out of there and just cancel out of there, if we then go into the workflow again, for this particular workflow, if we edit that workflow and if we just look at the credentials against the workflow, what we can see is that I've actually set that workflow to go and look for the credentials on the HSM. So it overrides what's set as the default. Using this mechanism, you can, as I said before, you can set the default as a HSM, but then maybe for one of your applications or for one of your file types, for instance payroll, you might want to actually force people to use smart cards. You can also mix and match, so if you wanted it to sign using the HSM and transmit using the smart card, you can set that scenario up as well. So it's totally flexible within EPG as to which set of credentials you use. What you can also do within EPG, if you wanted the HSM to be the default, but if you should then lose connectivity to the HSMs, you then wanted to, as your disaster recovery plan, fall back to smart cards, you can set that up within EPG as well. Okay, so that's sort of the config behind what we're trying to do. What I'm going to do now is just pop up a particular folder here. So this is the folder that EPG is currently monitoring. These files are not constituted in the actual config, so EPG is not looking for any of these files. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in a file that EPG is looking for, which I've just basically taken across from another folder. So within a few seconds, EPG should recognize that that file is in the folder, and it should import into EPG, and it will do the validation immediately. So again, if we now just pop back to EPG, we can now see within the summary screen we've got some tasks that have appeared, and those tasks are associated with this file. So the file has come in, it's been validated, and the next task is to authorize. So I'll put a manual authorize in this workflow, because generally what happens, even though you're automating the sign and transmit, most organizations still like to have a little look at the file just before they allow it to go on to the process. However, if you just wanted to import the file, and if you pass validation, you wanted to push it out the door, you just wouldn't have the authorize in there, and it would go out the door immediately as soon as it passed validation. So what I'm going to do, I can either get to the appropriate screen from the submissions screen, or I could do it from the task. Either way takes you to this screen. If you're late sort of doing the authorization task, you would get an alert down here, and you can get to this screen from the alert as well. So there's several ways to get to this screen to be able to process the file. If you've got the correct permissions, you can view the file at this stage, so we can see what's physically in the file. Again, if you've got permissions, you can edit the file as well. And again, what you can do within the config of EPG, you can narrow down which fields can actually be edited within this. So if you only wanted people to be able to change this processing date, for example, you could specify that within the backend configuration, and then they wouldn't be able to edit any of these fields. Even though they had the edit rights, they would only have the permissions to edit this particular field. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, well, actually, yeah, we're going to authorize that file. Okay, that is authorized. So the next tasks are still there, and although this task is automated, I'm still assigned that task in case it goes wrong. So if for whatever reason EPG cannot get to the HSM, then if I'm assigned the task, I'd get any alerts associated with it. But we'll see that that task has disappeared because it's we've automated the task and we've got access to the HSM. EPG's automatically logged onto the HSM, got the credentials, used it to sign the file, and it's done the sign. So we can see here that the status has now changed to signed, and the next task is to transmit. EPG will now go away, get the credentials, do the login on to BACS, and send the file away to BACS. And we can see that that has just happened. The file is now sat there as transmitted. We go back, we now have no tasks because they've been completed. And we can still go back to that file. We can look in that file, we can still browse it. Make sure that what we think has been sent has in fact been sent. And we can also access the submission summary report. So we can see that it completed. We sent it as a structural test. These are the credentials that we used to sign the file and used to send the file. And then we've got some summary details of what BACS have received. Okay, some other config that can be useful around setting up automated processing is that if you have a file that gets imported and fails validation, even you could have got a file of 1 million records, and if one of those records fails validation, that prevents the file going to BACS. So if you're trying to fully automate this process, you wouldn't want the file to be prevented from going to BACS. So you can utilize something within the workflow here, where within the import, you can set this move records with validation errors into a separate submission. And what happens there is that the file of good records still gets processed, still gets automatically signed, automatically transmitted, and you're left with a file of errored records, which maybe the following day you would come in and you would manage that. So you can do a fully lights out run through EPG of importing a file, validating and sending the valid records to BACS. Okay, that concludes this webinar on processing via hardware security modules. Other webinars are available around the overall config and introduction, also processing with smart cards and also BACS bureau processing. I hope you found that useful. Thank you.